One of these three coding tools caps your context far below the number on its own spec sheet. Antigravity, Claude Code, and Codex all shipped major upgrades in 2026, chasing developers who want an agent that can finish real work without handholding. Pick the wrong one and you either pay for headroom you'll never touch, or watch it run out of room halfway through a project. 5 tests settle it, covering cost, coding benchmark performance, speed, context, and output limits, and deployment, with a running scoreboard the whole way. Test 1 is cost. Pick a tool on price alone and you can still end up disappointed, because the gap that used to separate these three has basically closed. Antigravity's Entry Pro plan runs $19.99 a month, Claude Code's Pro plan is $20, and ChatGPT Plus with Codex built in is also $20. That's already close enough to call identical. At the top end, it stays just as tight. Antigravity added an Ultra tier at $99 and an Ultra Max tier at $200 in 2026, and actually cut its own top price down from a previous $249.99. Claude Code's Max plans sit at $100 and $200, and Codex added a new $100 Pro tier on top of the original $200 Pro tier. Drop in the comments which plan you're currently paying for, because there's a decent chance you're paying the exact same amount as someone running a completely different tool. Cost being tied just means the next test is where these three start pulling apart, and it's the one most developers care about the most. Call test 1 a tie. Nobody's ahead yet, 0 for all three. My name is Brian and I'm in these tools 12 hours a day, so you don't have to be. Test 2 is coding benchmark performance. Go with the weaker coder here, and you end up doing the fixing yourself, which defeats the point of paying for an agent in the first place. The standard benchmark for this is SWE Bench Verified, and the scores crowded together fast. Claude's Opus tier models and GPT 5.5 now sit within about a point of each other in the high 80s, close enough that the difference barely matters day to day. Antigravity trails behind at roughly 76%, and that number is community tracked rather than an official Google score, so treat it as directional. Because the easy benchmark stopped separating anyone, the harder SWE Bench protest is where the real gap shows up. One of the biggest problems I run into when using AI agents is turning their output into YouTube content I can actually use to market my product. That's why this video is sponsored by Subscriber, a tool that helps business owners connect their AI agents to YouTube and market their products without spending 10 hours every week creating content. You can connect Claude or ChatGPT directly to Subscriber. It then analyzes your business, website, and YouTube channel to help you create SEO-optimized video ideas, scripts, thumbnails, and even complete videos that actually match your brand. What I like most is that every week, Subscriber gives me a list of high-potential video ideas I can immediately execute, and it can even help edit videos for me, with or without my face, including videos like the one you're watching right now. It's easy to get started, and you can try Subscriber for free using the link in the description below. Now back to the video. On that one, Claude-based tooling leads clearly at around 69%, with Antigravity down near 55%. Claude Code takes test 2. That lead came from the harder benchmark, not the crowded one, which says something about how thin the gap actually is on paper. Speed is next, and it tells a genuinely split story. The scoreboard now reads Claude Code 1, Codex 0, Antigravity 0. Test 3 is speed. A slow tool costs you time every single session, and a tool that stalls partway through costs you a lot more than that. Community throughput testing puts Antigravity around 289 output tokens per second on Gemini 3.5 Flash, well ahead of the roughly 67 to 71 tokens per second for Claude Code and Codex. Separate hands-on testing tells a different story about finishing power, though. Claude Code installed cleanly, wrote the code, configured the environment, and pushed the commit with no manual steps needed. Codex installed just as cleanly, but stalled near the finish line, needing manual git setup to complete the job. That makes test 3 a tie. Raw speed and reliable finishing speed point in two different directions, and neither figure here comes from an audited benchmark, so both deserve the same grain of salt. Up next is the test with the biggest gap between what a tool advertises and what it actually gives you. The scoreboard holds at Claude Code 1, Codex 0, Antigravity 0. Stick with me, because the last 4 tests are where this decision actually flips. Test 4 is context and output limits. Run out of context mid-task and the tool forgets half your codebase. Misjudge the output cap and it just stops generating in the middle of a file. Antigravity's Pro tier advertises up to a 2 million token context window, tied to its Gemini 3 Pro integration, though that figure is vendor-claimed rather than independently audited. Claude Code doubled its own window this year, up to 1 million tokens from 200,000 back in March. Codex advertises 1.05 million tokens for GPT 5.5, which sounds competitive with Claude Code on paper. Output caps land closer together. Codex and Antigravity both top out at 128,000 tokens per response. Claude's ceiling depends on which model you're running, from 64,000 up to 128,000, with a 300,000 token option available through a batch API beta. Antigravity wins Test 4 on the strength of the largest advertised window. That advertised Codex number is not the whole story, and there's a specific reason why, which comes up again in a minute. First, one more test decides where you'll actually be running any of this. The scoreboard is tied at the top now. Claude Code 1, Antigravity 1, Codex 0. Test 5 is deployment and modality. Choose a tool that doesn't live where you actually work, and you'll stop opening it within a week, no matter how good its benchmark score is. Antigravity 2.0 now ships a full desktop app, a standalone CLI, and a public SDK, which closes a gap it used to have against the other two. Codex runs the same agent across terminal, IDE, web, and the cloud, with fire and forget cloud runs and scheduled tasks built in. Claude Code stays terminal first with IDE integration layered on, and independent hands-on testing keeps ranking it the most reliable at finishing a task without manual cleanup. All three now handle text and image input, so there's no separation there either. Every tool covers CLI, IDE, and some cloud surface now, just with a different specialty each. Test 5 ends in a tie too. Final scoreboard, Claude Code 1, Antigravity 1, Codex 0, with 2 ties along the way. Antigravity took the context and output limits test, and its 2 million token window is the standout number in this whole comparison, though it leans on vendor and community claims more than the other two. Claude Code took the coding benchmark test and edged ahead on real-world task completion, which is what actually turned 2 ties into a lead. Codex never won a test outright, but it tied on cost and on deployment, and its biggest story this year wasn't a win. It was the gap between what it promises and what it delivers. Now, Antigravity took the context and output limits test, and its 2 million token window is the standout number in this whole comparison, though it leans on vendor and community claims more than the other two. Claude Code took the coding benchmark test and edged ahead on real-world task completion, which is what actually turned 2 ties into a lead. Codex never won a test outright, but it tied on cost and on deployment, and its biggest story this year wasn't a win. It was the gap between what it promises and what it delivers. Antigravity took the context and output limits test, and its 2 million token window is the standout number in this whole comparison, though it leans on vendor and community claims more than the other two. Claude Code took the coding benchmark test and edged ahead on real-world task completion, which is what actually turned 2 ties into a lead. Codex never won a test outright, but it tied on cost and on deployment, and its biggest story this year wasn't a win. It was the gap between what it promises and what it delivers. If you want the most reliable, highest-scoring coding agent for daily work, Claude Code is the default. If you need one agent that follows you across terminal, IDE, and cloud with scheduled runs built in, Codex earns its price. If you want to hand a tool your entire codebase at once and don't mind numbers that aren't fully verified yet, Antigravity is your lane. The overall pick is Claude Code, and the reason is simple. It's the only one of the three with a clearly verified benchmark lead and the strongest track record of finishing a real task without you stepping in to fix it. One thing nobody talks about is what happens to Codex's context window once you're actually inside the CLI. The spec sheet says 1.05 million tokens for GPT 5.5, but the product caps that down to somewhere between 258,000 and 400,000 usable tokens once you're working in a real session. That gap didn't show up on any spec sheet. It surfaced in an open issue on OpenAI's own GitHub tracker, which is the only place most users would ever find it. That gap is exactly the kind of thing that only shows up once you've picked a tool and started relying on it. If you've already landed on Claude Code after this, the next real question is how it stacks up against Cursor, and that comparison is coming next.